London, 1837. The city was shrouded in fog, its narrow alleys flickering under dim gas lamps, when whispers began spreading of a figure that seemed less man and more phantom. They said he could leap impossibly high, vaulting walls and rooftops with a speed that mocked pursuit. His eyes glowed red like burning coals, and his breath was described as blue flames erupting from some unearthly furnace. He clawed at victims with iron-tipped hands, leaving both wounds and terror behind. This was not a highwayman, not a cut-purse, not even a lunatic wandering the streets. This was something stranger, something that quickly earned a name that would echo through penny dreadfuls, newspapers, and terrified conversations in drawing rooms. Spring-heeled Jack. Reports said he appeared suddenly, bounding across dark lanes and vanishing just as quickly, as if the laws of gravity bent to his command. Servant girls claimed to be ambushed by a figure with sharp ears, clawed fingers, and a cape that flowed like wings. Men described duels with him in courtyards, only to watch him leap away over high fences no ordinary human could clear. Every description was a little different, yet all carried the same chilling detail: an inhuman ability to jump and an aura of supernatural dread. The authorities dismissed the early tales as drunken exaggerations, but the fear was too widespread to ignore. Newspapers seized the story, amplifying rumors until London itself seemed to hold its breath each night. Was he a demon loosed upon the streets? A prankster with mechanical contraptions? Or something else? Something born from the paranoia of a city already haunted by crime, superstition, and shadows. Spring-heeled Jack was no longer just a rumor in taverns. He became a specter that the public demanded answers for. Yet with every new account, the legend only grew darker, more theatrical, more terrifying. This was not just another London scare. It was the birth of one of the Victorian era's most enduring mysteries. The first widely reported attack attributed to Spring-heeled Jack came in late 1837, when a young servant girl claimed that a cloaked figure leapt from an alley and tore at her clothes with claws that seemed metallic. She described eyes that glowed like lanterns and a mouth that spat out flames. Terrified, she fled, but the memory of that glowing face followed her long after. Within weeks, more women stepped forward with similar stories. They told of being cornered in the darkness, of a figure that seemed to materialize from nowhere, and of hands like talons that raked their skin before he bounded away into the night. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in January of 1838, when a young woman named Jane Alsop answered a knock at her door. Outside stood a man who claimed to be a police officer, saying he needed a light because he had caught Spring-heeled Jack nearby. Trusting him, she brought out a candle. In that instant, the man threw off his disguise. His eyes blazed red, and blue flames poured from his mouth. He lunged at her, tearing her dress with sharp claws. Jane screamed for help, and though her family rushed to her aid, the attacker leapt over a fence with impossible speed and vanished into the fog. This single event transformed the legend into a citywide panic. Newspapers described the assault in shocking detail, warning readers that an inhuman creature stalked their neighborhoods. Jane Alsop was not dismissed as hysterical. Instead, her testimony was printed and reprinted, lending weight to the growing terror. Soon after, another woman reported a similar attack in which the figure's icy grip left her fainting in horror. Again, the intruder vanished in a bound that no ordinary man could have performed. These accounts were not merely gossip whispered in taverns. They became official cases, recorded and investigated, and yet no explanation could be found. Spring-heeled Jack had crossed from rumor into undeniable phenomenon. He was not just terrifying victims. He was beginning to terrify an entire city. By the winter of 1838, Spring-heeled Jack was no longer whispered about only in dark alleys or quiet households. His name had leapt onto the front pages of London's newspapers. The press seized every sighting, every rumor, and amplified it until the city itself seemed under siege by a phantom in human shape. Headlines screamed of the terror of London, describing him as a devilish figure haunting respectable districts. Each fresh report deepened the panic, convincing citizens that something beyond explanation prowled the fog-bound streets. The atmosphere in London changed. Servant girls refused to go out after dark. Carriages were hired by families fearful of letting daughters walk unescorted. Even the wealthier districts, once thought safe, began reporting strange figures bounding across rooftops. The tales grew increasingly bizarre. Some described Jack as wearing a helmet and tight-fitting suit that shone like oilskin. Others claimed his eyes glowed like fire, and his laughter echoed unnaturally. The details clashed, but the core of the terror remained the same. A monstrous figure that could leap where no man could follow. Authorities found themselves mocked by the newspapers. If London police could not catch a single man, people wondered, how could they ever protect the public? Some even accused officials of downplaying the threat to avoid embarrassment. Meanwhile, the legend of Jack spread far beyond London. Penny dreadful writers turned him into a sensational character, a mix of villain, ghost, and trickster. Children whispered his name in schoolyards, and terrified parents warned them not to linger after dusk. The strange figure was no longer just a criminal or prankster in the eyes of the public. He was becoming folklore in real time, a living legend born from the unease of a city caught between the old world of superstition and the new age of science and industry. In the gaslit nights of Victorian London, Spring-Heeled Jack was both monster and mirror, reflecting the fears of a society struggling with change. And the more he was feared, the more often he seemed to appear. As the fear deepened, the stories of Spring-Heeled Jack grew ever more dramatic. He was no longer confined to lonely lanes or quiet homes. Reports came of him appearing in crowded streets, springing onto rooftops before stunned onlookers. Some claimed that policemen and even soldiers had confronted him, only to be left bewildered as he bounded away with superhuman agility. One account described shots being fired, yet the bullets seemed to pass through him, leaving no mark. To many, this confirmed what they already feared, that Jack was no ordinary man, but some creature beyond mortal reach. Crowds gathered in certain districts at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the notorious figure, and often, their hopes were rewarded. Witnesses spoke of a tall caped figure that stood watching from rooftops, his glowing eyes fixed on the crowd below, before vaulting into the air with terrifying ease. Some insisted they saw sparks of fire erupt from his mouth as he leapt, a theatrical flourish that turned fear into outright horror. To a city accustomed to fog, shadows, and superstition, such sights blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Theatrical or not, these appearances cemented Jack's legend. The penny dreadfuls painted him as a villain out of Gothic romance, part devil, part acrobat, and part ghost. Young men tried to imitate him, donning costumes to frighten passers-by, though none could match the sheer physical feats attributed to the real figure. In truth, these imitators only added to the confusion, for now the authorities had no way of knowing whether each report was the true Jack or a pretender seeking thrills. London's fear was now tangled with fascination. Spring-Heeled Jack was no longer just an attacker. He had become a spectacle, an uninvited performer on the city's stage. Each leap into the night, each glowing-eyed appearance, etched his image deeper into the collective mind. A phantom in boots of spring steel, a demon with a human grin, a symbol of terror that mocked the very idea of safety. He had stepped out of the shadows and onto the rooftops of legend. With every new sighting, speculation grew wilder. If Spring-Heeled Jack was not a demon, then who could he be? Some newspapers suggested he was a nobleman, indulging in cruel pranks against the working poor. The idea gained traction because his attacks often targeted servant girls and isolated women, those least protected by society. Rumors swirled about a young aristocrat named the Marquis of Waterford, infamous for reckless behavior and known for tormenting women. He had wealth, influence, and a taste for mischief. Could he have created some kind of mechanical boots or device to leap so high? Many Londoners were convinced. Others believed Jack was the product of invention, not nobility. The Victorian era was alive with experiments in steam power, hydraulics, and early engineering marvels. Could a cunning inventor have built springs, or even hidden pneumatic contraptions that allowed such leaps? To a city on the edge of industrial revolution, this explanation felt almost plausible. Yet no device was ever found, and no inventor stepped forward to claim the terror. Still, many refused to believe any human explanation. How could an ordinary man spit fire, survive bullets, and leap across rooftops as if he had wings? Clergymen denounced him as a demon, while others whispered of the devil himself walking the foggy streets of London. For the poor and superstitious, Jack was a punishment or a portent, something unearthly that had chosen their city as its hunting ground. What made Spring-Heeled Jack so difficult to categorize was precisely this tension. Was he prankster or phantom, aristocrat or demon, a man of science or a fiend from folklore? Each theory only added another mask to his legend, and each failed to resolve the terror that continued night after night. By the middle of the 19th century, the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack had become more than a passing scare. He was reported in towns beyond London, seen leaping across fields, rooftops, and churchyards miles from the capital. The descriptions remained eerily consistent: glowing eyes, clawed hands, a cape, and leaps that defied reason. Wherever he appeared, panic followed, and newspapers eagerly carried the tales to every corner of Britain. Even as decades passed, the sightings refused to fade. In some villages, people claimed to see him vaulting over barns or bounding across hedgerows with unearthly speed. Others swore they heard his high-pitched laughter echoing through the night. The figure had escaped London's boundaries and entered the folklore of the countryside, becoming less a criminal and more a wandering specter. To children, he became a warning whispered by parents: behave, or Spring-Heeled Jack will leap through your window. But here's the haunting question I want you to think about right now. Were all these accounts just mass hysteria, exaggerated by newspapers hungry for sales? Or was there truly someone, or something, out there that no one ever managed to catch? I want you to pause for a moment and let me know in the comments. If you lived in Victorian London and you heard footsteps behind you on a foggy night, would you believe it was a man in a mask? Or would you run, convinced it was Spring-Heeled Jack himself? This is the power of the legend. It forced people then, and even us now, to question what was real and what was myth. Spring-Heeled Jack wasn't just haunting the streets. He was haunting the imagination. As years passed, Spring-Heeled Jack began to shift from a figure of pure terror into something stranger, an icon of culture. By the 1840s and 50s, penny dreadfuls and stage plays were already adapting his image, turning him into a theatrical villain who thrilled audiences as much as he frightened them. He was depicted as a caped trickster, a villain leaping across rooftops with a devilish grin. The newspapers that once warned citizens of his menace now shared space with publishers who sold his legend for entertainment. Yet this did not erase the fear. In fact, it amplified it. The more Jack appeared in literature and theater, the more he blurred the line between fiction and reality. Was he merely a character invented for cheap thrills? Or was the fiction drawn from a very real terror that no one had ever fully explained? Children whispered his name in schoolyards. Families told stories of his leaps by the fireside. And for those who claimed to have seen him, the laughter of theater-goers was no comfort. They swore what they had witnessed was no story, but a nightmare brought to life. Even the criminal underworld borrowed his imagery. Some thieves dressed in capes to mimic him, hoping the sight alone would freeze victims with fear. Others spread rumors that Spring-Heeled Jack was one of their own, a shadowy avenger prowling where police could not follow. His figure had transcended the foggy alleys of London to become a symbol of both dread and fascination. A villain, a phantom, and perhaps even a hero depending on who told the tale. By the height of the Victorian age, Jack was no longer just a mystery to be solved. He was a cultural phenomenon, immortalized in print, performance, and gossip. But his appearances did not cease. Reports still surfaced, each one renewing the question, was this myth still alive? Leaping from page to street, one of the most unsettling parts of Spring-Heeled Jack's story is how long it refused to die. Even as London modernized with railways, electricity, and police reforms, reports of the leaping phantom continued well into the late 1800s. Witnesses swore they saw him bounding across rooftops in Liverpool, leaping fences in the Midlands, and startling night watchmen in isolated towns. Each account carried the same chilling details: glowing eyes, clawed hands, and impossible leaps. In 1877, one of the most famous late sightings was reported at Aldershot Barracks, where soldiers on guard duty claimed to have seen a figure land before them out of nowhere. They fired at him, but the bullets had no effect. Instead, the figure laughed, touched one of the men with icy hands, and then vanished with a leap into the darkness. These soldiers were trained men, not gullible villagers, yet they insisted the event was real. To many, this was proof that Spring-Heeled Jack was not just a prankster, but something supernatural. Even into the early 20th century, reports surfaced of strange figures leaping through rural lanes or over churchyards. By now, the line between myth and memory was fully blurred. Some dismissed the later stories as copycats or exaggerations, while others whispered that the true Jack had never been caught because he could never be caught. He was not bound by age, time, or human limits. What makes these later accounts so haunting is that they arrived in an age of reason and progress. Britain was embracing modernity, yet this figure from the shadows of superstition still stalked its nights. If Jack was only ever a man, then how could he still be seen decades later? And if he was not a man at all, what was he? Despite decades of fear, countless reports, and endless speculation, the true identity of Spring-Heeled Jack was never uncovered. No one was ever arrested. No deathbed confession ever surfaced, and no device capable of his extraordinary feats was ever found. The figure remained elusive, dancing just beyond the reach of both law and reason. And with each year that passed, his mystery only deepened. Some historians argue that Jack was nothing more than hysteria amplified by sensationalist newspapers. In a city already gripped by crime, poverty, and superstition, perhaps all it took was a few vivid stories to ignite a wildfire of fear. Once the public believed, every shadow could be Jack, every rooftop echo his leap. Yet this explanation fails to satisfy those who point to eyewitness accounts from trained soldiers, respected citizens, and groups who swore they saw him together. Could so many people have been so mistaken? Others insist he was flesh and blood, a man who used trickery, costume, and perhaps crude technology to create illusions of the impossible. Yet if so, how did he evade capture for so long, across so many years and so many miles? Still others refused to let go of the supernatural theory that Jack was not human at all, but something older, darker, a figure that haunted London as a reflection of its fears. What lingers most is the silence. Unlike other mysteries where evidence eventually surfaces, Jack left behind nothing but stories, scars, and fear. He seemed to belong as much to imagination as to reality, a phantom that leapt out of one world into another. And that may be why he remains unsolved. For how do you catch a legend that exists half in shadow and half in the human mind? More than a century has passed since Spring-Heeled Jack last terrified the streets, but his shadow lingers. He remains one of Britain's strangest mysteries. A figure who was never caught, never explained, and never forgotten. His story continues to appear in books, folklore, and even modern horror culture, a reminder that some mysteries outlive the very age that birthed them. Was he a man with hidden inventions, an aristocrat with a cruel sense of humor, or something far older that slipped briefly into the human world? No answer has ever silenced the question. What makes Jack's tale so unnerving is how easily it could happen again. Imagine walking home on a misty night, hearing footsteps behind you, and glancing back to see a figure with glowing eyes bounding toward you across the rooftops. The fear that froze Victorian London is not so far removed from our own. Jack represents something deeper, the idea that terror itself can wear any mask, leap any wall, and endure any century. He is both a ghost of the past and a symbol of the unknown. And so, his legend lives on. Every leap he took was not just across London's rooftops, but into the collective imagination of all who hear his story. Even now, as you watch this, perhaps you feel that familiar chill of wondering whether a shadow outside your window might not just be a shadow at all. If you've stayed with me until this moment, you are the reason Black Thread Mysteries continues to grow. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Spring-Heeled Jack was a man, a myth, or something supernatural that defies all explanation? And if you want more journeys into the unsolved, the eerie and the unforgettable, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and share this with someone who loves a mystery that refuses to die. Because here, the threads we pull always lead deeper into the dark.